Hello and welcome to the Community Voice. I am Fara. My guests today are religious leaders in our community. I want to welcome Pastor Steve Alessi. He is from Metro Life Church. And next to him is Rabbi Robyn Fisher from Beth. They are my guests. And today we are talking about growing anti-Semitism and combating it both locally and within our communities. I want to thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
I just want to start and I want to just acknowledge that today is day 200 plus of the hostages being held. And this anti-Semitism began not 6 months ago, 200 days ago. This has been an ongoing, festering sore, not only globally, but within a community. And you guys have come together, and I want to talk about how that has happened as a Christian, as a Jew, and brought together to bring awareness to both, not only to each of your communities, but bridging that relationship amongst people.
Yeah. Now, this is going to be very hard because the two of us have a lot to say.
Well,
and we're used to being the ones that get the mics. So, but I will say, first, thank you so very much for opening this door. You and I had conversations prior to, and I talked to a lot of people that make promises, but they don't keep their promises. Thanks for keeping your promise on this, because you were so taken back over the fact that a Christian and a Jew, a pastor, a rabbi, would come together on this subject.
I don't know if I was taken aback, but I never had the opportunity to walk into that relationship.
Yeah.
So it was very refreshing, and it was very heartfelt, because I think as a Jewish woman, and I speak maybe for you too, Rabbi, is that we don't feel sometimes supported. Yeah. So hearing it from another religious, especially religious leader, to hear that is really heartwarming, and it made me feel not so alone when I walked into a church, you know,
especially after October 7th, right? Though we did feel particularly alone. The silence of the community and our leaders and the world, and if they weren't silent, they were outspoken in their virulent attack of Jewish people and Israel in particular.
Absolutely. So how did this partnership, this coming together, this bridge happen?
We're going to dive right into this, right? So first of all, the two of us sit on the Interfaith Advisory Board of Miami-Dade County. And we have been always looking for a project, but this is not how it started. And this came about totally organically. We were having a conversation one day about how to raise funds for our Interfaith Advisory Board. And totally in a benign, non-meaningful way, Pastor Steve said to our group, "Come on, my Jewish brothers and sisters, you've got it. We know you've got it. Let's cough it up and make it happen." Now, there was nothing that he would think would have been hurtful in that, but I looked and reacted with such blaring anger and like looking at him in his eyes that, Pastor Steve, you cannot say that. That is inappropriate. That is very hurtful for the Jewish people. That is pulling on an old trope, and it is very dangerous. And I think from that moment that everybody heard it, everybody was silent in that moment. And it was so glaring that I really almost left that board thinking, I have no partners here. I'm not sure that my voice would really matter. And after some reflection, I was like, you know what, particularly at this time, you need to be there to say something. And nothing happened except for that I wanted to create like an anti-hate campaign, being respectful of everybody else's hates, the anti-Black hate, anti-Asian hate, anti-Islamic hate, and there was lots of it. But I felt like I would be inclusive and do an anti-hate campaign. Pastor Steve says, after I made this long proposal, had interviewed everybody, including the mayor, about what we were going to do, and we're going to have this countywide effort, and he said, absolutely not. I'm like, what? We're not doing what? And he said, it cannot be anti-hate. It has to be anti-Semitism. People don't know what anti-Semitism is, and it is of the moment. We must do this. And with his leadership, brought the entire board together. We did a vote, and it was unanimous. No, we're not doing anti-hate. We're doing anti-Semitism. So that, from a moment of me feeling alone and totally, I don't know, unsupported, came this incredible wave of support and understanding the need to create a community effort.
You're smiling. Because you gave her that 5 minutes that she needed, right?
Oh, no, that was so perfect. And I wanted her to share this story because, not in my mind, we're sitting there. We have, out of, I don't know, we've got 20 some odd members of the Interfaith Board representing each of our commissioners. And we only have 4 rabbis. And so I'm around the table. My church, I made a pledge. We were going to give a certain amount of money. And it kind of like the room went quiet. Anytime you start talking about money, I don't care what the environment is, everybody gets quiet.
Faith.
Right? Or the faith. You're right. Those two things. And so right away, the room went quiet. And I was joking about the whole thing that just, hey, come on, don't get so tight, everybody. And I made the reference to my Jewish friends, the rabbis, and it did. Boy, Rabbi Robyn, she was like on it. And I'm like, you know what? That was in my mind at that point, it was like, that was inappropriate. Here's the point. Whether I was joking or not, we didn't have the relational equity at this point for me to even joke about something like that. And it was a joke. But then, and to me, I had forgot about that. She shared this a couple of days ago when we were talking about how that really rocked her. And then to think that now, a couple of months later, we're the only 2 on that board that said we're going to represent a committee to stand up against anti-hate. And here it is, the Jew and the Christian doing so. That could have been at odds over a joke or an opinion, a mindset that may not have been correct and could have been perceived and received as very offensive by some, whereas others it may have been a joke. No, it wasn't a joking matter. So here we are now running with this to be able to let our South Florida community be aware of what anti-Semitism is.
What is anti-Semitism? And there's a book definition, but what does that mean to you? Maybe before October 7th, and possibly what it means after you had this conversation with Rabbi Robyn about anti-Semitism and how might it have offended her. Just a quiff of a conversation. Has it changed?
Well, I just define it simply as anti-Jewish hate. It's just Jewish hate, and I personally, and again, Miami kid right here, my first encounter with a Jewish young man was David Stein, that was on the corner of my street in Westchester, and I had a different opinion of David because of our different beliefs. Christian belief, his Jewish belief. And I, as a kid, I was just upset that, okay, there were certain days off that we had in the school system, and they had different days off in the school system. I'm like, wow, that's unfair. I didn't know. And so I had this opinion of David over, again, a mindset, right? So it wasn't until later on I started to grow in my just understanding of David and his family and their high holy days compared to our holy holidays, that I started to appreciate more and more just the similarities of everything that I believe as a Christian, and then becoming a leader in the area, are similarities. So it was, no, this can't be about putting a label on my Jewish friends. And I'm afraid that that's what's happened with this anti-Semitism. There is a label, and there's hate attached to that, which then creates what we have today, which is now just, it's expressed in a way that is scary.
Absolutely. And
I think there's also 2 different forms here of anti-Semitism. One is the outright protests that are happening, the hate speech, the rhetoric that is flying around, Jews from the river to the sea. Those are all very very blatant forms of anti-Semitism. But then there's the latent ones that really start bubbling at the surface and become normative. And that is like one of the things that we were talking about, what brought us together, and that is the Jewish power and wealth and ability to change even the weather and, like ridiculous things that just make no sense at all, that become normative and are brushed over, and that starts tearing apart the fabric of our society. And it just begins with the Jews. It certainly doesn't end with them. It's only the beginning of the precursor for so much more hate in our society. But it's the underlying hate of people and distrust and wanting to blame a people for no reason at all.
Absolutely. And I know that we're feeling it when we watch the news or when we are reading or we're on radio or when we're speaking and social media. I mean, it has its moment, it has its place, it is happening. But in the communities that you both serve, what are you doing to help maybe bring down that tone, to change that rhetoric? You organize this as a posturing for anti-Semitism. What are you doing to educate the community that you both serve?
Well, so we're just beginning this process. There's one is what is the community doing, and then there's what is our little community doing.
So define that both. Define what the community feels right now, what each of your communities feel.
Yeah, I think that might be different too.
Yeah, absolutely.
From our standpoint, when we were talking about doing this anti-Semitism campaign, the rabbi did not necessarily want to focus just on anti-Semitism, which shows me the posture of many of our Jewish friends. This is like a battle they want to handle on their own, and they feel as though so many are against them. I mean, I was in a resort not too long ago, and had many vacationers that came from Israel. They were Israeli, and they would hardly look me in the eye. And I'm like, this is terrible. They are so afraid, ashamed right now of even letting their Jewishness be known because they sense this attack that is against them. So the fact that we had to say, no, this particular campaign is going to be anti-Semitism in itself. Here's what we're doing in the Christian church environment. We're, one, educating. And wanting to be here today helps me tremendously with those that would be listening that share the same faith that I share, which is where I need the rabbi to help me articulate exactly what anti-Semitism is. I love Italian restaurants. I love Italian food. Alessi, heritage is Italian. I go to an Asian restaurant and they hand me a pair of chopsticks. I'm lost. I'm doing my best to try to eat with chopsticks. And though I do it, I'm in my head the whole time because I'm afraid I'm being judged by my inability to use my chopsticks. Look, there's differences that we have in our beliefs, but our soul unity is around everything that it goes against hate, because we can't walk in the goodness of life and have any measure of hate. So what I'm doing as just a Christian, a pastor, Metro Life Church started it back in the 90s, and thanks to the community newspaper, they were there on the front end when we went into Doral, and when we have our church down in Dayland, they were always so helpful to help us get the word out of what we were doing as a church. That, my part has tried to be, how can we educate our South Florida community that is aware? And right now they're choosing sides based on the majority, the bigger voice that we're seeing in our media, which is just, I hate to say it, it was at one time pro-Palestine, which I understand because of what sometimes things could be perceived of from the outside. But now it's not just pro-Palestinian, it's pro-Hamas. And that's scary because that's a hate group that wants to push Israel, which is a little sliver of a country, into the sea, as they say. That is pure hate. And as a Christian, that's nothing we stand on. We're not even close to that. So from our perspective as a Christian, trying to say to my community, when I get up and I talk in our church, and we've raised money, we've helped purchase ambulances there in Israel. We are looking to help support.
We need more Pastor Steves in the world.
We're helping support buying bomb shelters for our Jewish community. we're trying to educate constantly, talk about it, which is why being in relationship with somebody like Rabbi Robyn is so important to my community. They got to feel her. They got to see her. They got to see what kind of people.
So I think that's really
with.
important, and he touched on two things. One is education, but education alone without having a relationship, our relationship changed dramatically from that first encounter by sitting down and being together outside of a meeting setting and getting to know each other. Who are you? Where did you grow up? You know, where are your family? What do they do? And seeing each other, as we say in Hebrew, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. He was no longer a person who sat on the board who shot out an anti-Semitism trope that he didn't mean. I really believe it is education. And maybe we were meant to have that conversation so that it can spark this conversation, so that he can educate not only his community, and it's big, but it's a small sliver of the Christian community, because I wonder how much the general Christian community is involved in this beating this anti-Semitism. As far as, I think it comes back down to, one, education, two, creating relationships or moments to form relationships, and I think it's also partnerships like we are having right now. If we don't create partnerships in our community where we can create space for talking, where we can learn from each other, where we can teach our children from early on, and we spoke about that too.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Which part? The teaching our children?
Yes.
Well, we need to teach each other that there are lots of different flavors of people in this world, and we have to be able to see each other for our differences and appreciate them, be able to love each other. And the ultimate, look, in our Jewish tradition, and I'm sure in many other beautiful spiritual traditions, we are created here with a purpose. And our purpose is to bring harmony and peace and love into this world, not to tear people apart and destroy them. There is a place for everybody. And certainly Israel is worthy of creating autonomy and fighting for their survival. And, for anybody to deny them of that is really to have a double standard. And it's just immoral, quite frankly, to have that, to be able to say that and to say that they don't have the right to defend themselves when they do.
Yeah. I would say the whole relational, raising up your kids, the education, ignorance plays a big part in any kind of judgment and hate and prejudice. It comes down to so much that's just a lack of knowledge. And in my Bible, it says that people will perish. They're gone because of a lack of knowledge. So I would just say to people that are listening to, even my Christian friends, man, you got to know your history. And you better be on the right side of history on this one. Because from our educational standpoint, it tells us when Abraham, who's the father of both of our faiths, the father of our faith is Abraham, and there's a passage in the Bible that tells us, I will bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. Speaking of Israel, I want to be on the right side of blessing. I want the hand of God moving in my life and my family. So not only do we teach it, now here's the relational component. And not only does she and I and some of my other rabbi friends in South Florida be able to connect on this relationally, man, I've taken my church 3 times on a pilgrimage to Israel.
What a the road to Mecca.
Oh my gosh.
It's beautiful. I was driving down, I was like, this is so beautiful. And to have the parishioners doing this is an awesome, for every religion, for every culture. It really is so inclusive.
What I found is this when we were there, and is Palestinians and Christian and Jews are in relationship with one another in Israel. The media is not showing us this. We sat there in a hospital where Palestinian children were sick, just being birthed, and you had their Jewish neighbors helping them, supporting them, in relationship with them, which is why you need to do some studies on your own to know where you stand. Don't buy into the social media influencers. Don't buy into the press, what you're seeing on some of our news channels. You better lock in and know this for yourself, because to me, it has a lot farther of a consequences than us just, well, I'm getting together along with my neighbor. No, there's a God factor involved here. I want to be on the right side of this as it pertains to even my relationship with God.
And what I find most distressing is this hatred that has festered. And we're dealing with sane minds here. We're dealing with teaching young minds, giving them the tools to make those rational decisions on the right side of the law, kind of thing.
Of morality.
But
and
the
humanity.
problem is that happening now in our schools, in our colleges right now. I just saw, off camera, we talked about it. A young girl is at a pro-Palestinian demonstration. The reporter asked her, "Why are you here?" And she says, "I don't know. I just got here from NYU." And she was at Columbia, and it was like she had to ask her friends. She goes, "Oh, we're learning more about Israel." Are you at a pro-Palestinian? And where can young people go to learn, to really educate themselves outside of, and I think that's what your mission is. And how do we reach, I know I'm asking, but maybe you don't have that solution yet, to those college kids, to those families that are searching for answers, so that we don't become a society that's lost our North Star. Our compass is all over the place, and and I think it's a time that we really need to ground ourselves to make those decisions and get the right footing. How do we do that as a community? The $1 million question, and if we had that, the interview would be
How
overcut.
much time do we have?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's a loaded question, but
with no easy answer.
Absolutely not. But there are some obvious things that we would want to turn to, and that would be like, where are the leaders of college campuses and universities? Where are the leaders of this country? Where people, leaders of corporations? How about Hollywood's stars? Instead of coming out and using it as an anti-Israel rant, and which is equating it with anti-Semitism, why are we speaking about love and calling out hate when it's hate? When the Israelis were murdered and slaughtered and sexually abused, the world was silent. Why? We didn't do that with George Floyd, and we shouldn't. We didn't do it with anti-Asian hate, and we shouldn't. But all of a sudden, there's a different standard when it comes to Israel and to the Jewish people.
Pastor Steve, looking into this, what does that look like to you? When you saw that the world was quiet, that there was not an outcry, and how do you bring that to your parishioners to make sense of it?
Well, Christianity isn't always supported in our environment, in our culture and society today either.
But no, it's no one's 100%, right?
No, but so to understand that my Jewish friends are being persecuted for their faith, for their beliefs. There is a connection, because we have that happening with some in our Christian community as well, where our values are being judged, and therefore, because of our beliefs, we are being persecuted.
So how do those people, how does your followers say, okay, I'm going to stand up for myself, be heard, be counted, as Netanyahu just said?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again,
you're
Fara,
the spiritual leader. I'm just firing the questions.
Yeah. We did this in our church, and it was a crazy thing on Easter. Biggest services you're going to have all year are going to be for us on Easter. So I had a friend of mine that I've known for 20, 30 plus years. His name's Gil Nahamkin. He, too old to serve in the military, but his 3 sons serve in the military when all this erupted. So they all went back to Israel. Gil was a military police, more or less, to help could patrol the streets there in Israel while his sons were out putting their lives on the front line. And on Easter, he kept telling me he was just so overwhelmed. Now, mind you, he and I haven't had a great relationship over the years, because he's been a mutual friend of mine. So him having a judgment about me and my beliefs as a Christian, and me having my viewpoints and beliefs about him as a Jew, just kind of kept us not up close and personal, but a little at odds, until this occurred, and he learned that we were sending money Now all of a sudden, I'm getting texts from this guy in the middle of the night, sending me pictures of him with his military police, sending pictures of his sons doing what his sons are having to do. So I invited him because he kept saying, I want to say thank you to your church.
But that changed you.
Well, touch me, bless me, man. So I bring him to the church. And on Easter, the biggest Sunday of the year, I give him the mic. He went crazy. He started getting very specific about the rapes, about the murders, everything that was happening there on October 7th that we don't hear about in our media. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've lost the whole service. This is over. I've lost any guest that's come in and so on. Ultimately, our people responded. Why? Because they were hearing it from somebody that was there experiencing it. So it's this podcast that we're doing today is the beginning. I can't wait to get the rabbi on my own podcast, the Family Business with the Alessis. Can't wait to get her on there because it shows my church. And here's what my podcast's about. I talk about things in my podcast that I can't talk about on Sundays. I want her there to help me continue to educate. So it's there.
So what is that? What would be the first question you would ask Rabbi Robyn during this podcast on the Community Voice with you and me and our audience in South Miami? What would be the first question you would ask her?
Oh my God. Help me educate my people.
That's not a question.
Educate us.
I think that what we want to get at is that how can we work together to combat anti-hate and anti-Semitism in particular, because that hate should not
Okay, where are we going with that? Okay, so now we're on the same page of anti-hate, anti-Semitism. We're on the same page as Christian and Jew, as humanitarian. Where do we go from here now? This is exactly what your organization, that you're in the walking, crawling stages. What do you want an audience to know that you do as spiritual leaders to your community right now? How are you going to help bridge this together? How can we do this?
We're talking about it. We're having podcasts. We're going to create social media campaign, hopefully that will inspire not only the leaders that are represented in this campaign to share their views on anti-Semitism and how maybe, through their word and their congregants and their affiliates, and it's going to start one by one. It's how it always does. It always has to start with one person having a conversation with another person. And I think leadership, if we can appeal to our leaders.
Who do you want to reach out to? Who would you want to connect with right in this minute?
Well, we represent our county commissioners. Thankfully, our county commissioners are all on board with what we're trying to get across here. We have statements. We've got big placards, our faces on them with our sentiments about anti-Semitism, so that when somebody walks into some of our county offices, they're able to see, wait a minute, there's people that are taking a stand for right here. And you don't have to be on one side or the other. You just have to make sure that ultimately what we're looking at here is peace, and nobody picking up a stone and throwing it at our Jewish friends or our Palestinian friends. Are we talking about the evils of Hamas? You better believe it. We're going to stand up against that evil regime that wants to kill and steal and destroy from people's lives. But our Palestinian friends, we're not about that. Our Muslim friends, we know there's a relational union that we need to have to help all ourselves, our people group, our beliefs. It's all based on our beliefs.
We have incredible support from Mayor Levine Cava as well. But I would call on university presidents here in our community, corporate leaders here in our community, and let them lead the charge. Let us get together. Let's convene a group of leaders and say, this is what we're doing. Where are you? Can you join us in this effort?
And I think that's really important. And this is the first step, is to have that conversation, those difficult conversations, because what's coming out of the universities right now and colleges is horrific. And if you can and I think that's your mission, is to get in front of their faces and to talk to these leaders, professors, in upper leadership. How can we make a difference so that the information, like you said, is correct, is accurate? We're sitting on the right side of this conversation.
Also having moral courage. Leaders have to be unabashedly out there and outspoken about this rhetoric and this hate and the protests that are happening, and not confuse it with free speech. it's not, nobody wants to deny anybody free speech, but when free speech infringes on people's safety and security and their well-being, then you've crossed that line. It's no longer free speech, and no one has that right in our Constitution to infringe on somebody's religious well-being, their humanity, their right to live a life without fear. That's why we live in the United States of America. And it's a very dangerous situation that we are in right now.
As we bring this down, I can see we got to close ourselves out here, right? Fara, I will say, we want to say thank you. We want to say thank you because you're asking us, what do we have to do? We're kind of finding our footing here.
Absolutely.
So you're helping us take steps in the right direction. We're not saying that you can't get out and protest. There were people that were standing on the Supreme Court steps just yesterday protesting as it comes down to a matter of life in the womb, abortion and so forth. You can get up and protest. You can get up and make your comments. You can do that. That's the blessing of living in this great country of ours with free speech. But you can't sit there and start to burn down buildings. You can't sit there and have this terrible chant about pushing people into the sea and wanting people killed and destroyed, taken off this planet. You can't do that. Burn flags. And no, that's not protest. That's violence, and we are not in favor of that. We can't support that.
And I also just want to kind of conclude with a concluding thought, and that we happen to be in the week of Passover. And that's very significant to note that in our Haggadah, we mention that in every generation, they try to destroy us. But we survived through God's help, through God's blessing. But it's more than that. It's through the partnerships of our community, through each individual using their voice of power, using their positions of leadership to make sure that that does not happen again. Yes, it could be looked at as doom and gloom, like in every generation, okay, here it is again, and we're up against this, or it can be a moment of hope, because we end on the Seder by saying, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, that we should have this messianic hope that we can have a better place, that we can live side by side, that we can appreciate the other and not have to denigrate and destroy and victimize another person, that we have a moment of hope. And I pray that it is so.
And you guys are that beacon of hope and the light. And thank you so much. We can go on for another 2 hours probably. I'm going to have you come back. But I want to thank you both for coming. Rabbi Robyn and Pastor Steve, thank you so much for all that you do. And mission on.
Thank you. Let's do it.
We'll come back. Okay.
Okay, I hope
and
so.
Thanks to the Miller
Thank you so much.
The Miller brothers who make it all happen.
It all happen.
And I want to thank you for joining me and our guests. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Fara Sachs, and this has been The Community Voice.